Why do so many men find that when they open up emotionally, their vulnerability is used against them, causes others to lose attraction, or even feel disgust? Story 1. I will never forget when I opened up to a former girlfriend about feeling really stressed, anxious, and depressed, and the toll it was taking on me. I started crying. When I finished talking, I looked at her, and she had a blank expression on her face. She said, "Why are you crying? You are a man, not a baby. Men don't cry." I didn't realize I was dating a baby. That only reinforced my belief to never open up to people because it was already incredibly difficult to do in the first place. Story 2. Because society typically uses masculinity as a weapon, being vulnerable is often seen as weakness. By societal standards, men have 3 acceptable occasions to cry, but the reality is they can only use 2 of them. These occasions are the death of a parent, the birth of a child, and the death of a longtime friend. None of these should be expressed in front of a woman. Story 3. I think it is because our society relies on men being stoic and enduring hardships without complaint. They do all the most dangerous jobs. Story 4. Because what people say and what is are very rarely the same. People may tell you it is okay to be vulnerable, but it only takes 1 or 17 times when it is used to win an argument for you to figure it out. It was never okay for men to be vulnerable in general, and it never will be, no matter what others tell you. It may be fine with very few people, choose wisely, but in general, remember what happens during an argument. Story 5. Be better at showing your feelings and communicating. Oh my God. Stop being such a coward. Something like that. Story 6. Because many women are interested in toxic masculinity as long as it does not negatively affect them personally. Story 7. More a question for Ask Women. But the ironic bit is you will probably hear many say, "Well, I do not." Yet if so many do not, why is it still a massive issue? Story 8. Because, contrary to what is promoted in society, women are not comfortable being responsible for handling a man's emotions. Story 9. That is how I knew my wife was the one. I cried in front of her, and she held me and said it was okay. Thank you for telling me the truth. We are celebrating our 15th anniversary soon. I love that woman with every fiber of my being. Story 10. I am not sure, but I was the victim of that as well, where my sister forced me to open up to her when I was feeling really down, only for her to use it against me a year later. Now my boyfriend and best friend are the only people I trust fully to be vulnerable with. Story 11. Men are not sympathetic figures. We are workhorses and objects of accountability. When we approach them being vulnerable, we do so only within the frame that they are accountable and in a way that cares about our feelings. Nobody telling men to open up is being sincere. We do it because we want to. There is no other reason. Whether culturally or instinctually, we just do not want to feel like we are supposed to care about men. We might like the feeling of superiority when we can get them to submit and act weak, but the thought of them being weak when we picture them as accountability factories revolts us. Story 12. There are multiple possible reasons. Exploitation. The goal was never to connect more, but to gather more information in case the other person wants to weaponize it against the boy or man to get more resources from him or to maximize damage done to him. Mindless romanticizing. The other person heard others say men need to be more vulnerable and demands that without any reflection from a man. The man trusts her and opens up, and what he reveals is something the other person is entirely unprepared for. It puts the man's actions into a whole new perspective, may result in unflattering implications for those around him, and it may mean that suddenly it is on the one who asked for this openness to react supportively, which they find themselves incapable of. Opening up requires more than a good speaker. It requires a good listener and is not done with just, "Well, damn, that's deep, fam." It is even worse when they are so unprepared that they start shaming the man for the things he had kept to himself intentionally. Pushing boundaries. Some people just want to push others for the sole sake of doing exactly that. They have no motive beyond wanting to make someone do something they don't really want to do. Once the opening up takes place, the boundary pusher is no longer invested. The goal has been achieved. Therefore, they will treat what they hear with disinterest. Being dismissed like that feels just as punishing as being shamed for opening up. Mental instability. Having dealt with a number of people who at the time had untreated mental health conditions, I can say an unfortunate side effect of someone not knowing about their condition is that they can spread instability around them. They might be genuinely interested, but that does not mean they are in full control of their reaction, especially if they come to find out something traumatic. Story 13. That has been the way things have been done as far back as human history has been recorded and likely long before that in prehistory. This is something that modern humans are struggling to change, but it will not be changed or accepted in the centuries to come. Some habits are, needless to say, tough to break. Story 14. Let me repeat something I posted elsewhere. In summary, gender roles. Due to different gender roles, both from embodied biological functions and reinforced societal norms, the roles of sexual intimacy and emotional vulnerability are swapped between the two sexes. Example: men seem to push women to open up with their sexual intimacy. Women seem to push men to open up with their emotional vulnerability. Men are shamed much more than women by everyone for revealing emotional vulnerability in unexpected contexts, as if it diminishes their value. Women are shamed much more than men by everyone for revealing their sexual intimacy in unexpected contexts, as if it diminishes their value. Men are more likely to lose interest in women once they obtain sexual intimacy, as they suddenly evaluate them as a whole being instead of being driven by the anticipation of what they could not get. Women are more likely to lose interest in men once they witness emotional vulnerability, as they suddenly evaluate them as a whole being instead of being driven by the curiosity of what they could not get. Story 15. Most women only want to hear about your successes and nothing about your problems. These women will label you a beta and place you in the no-sex friend zone. Yes, some of it is culture-driven gender norms, but there is a genetic twist to it too. Strong women only want to love, obey, and have intimacy with strong alpha males. Women, you know who you are, and you also know that those last parts are genuinely true. Story 16. A few reasons. They trust the wrong people. They do not know how to be vulnerable and only open up when they have completely lost control of their emotions, or they do not understand the difference between being vulnerable and trauma dumping. Story 17. It is the way people are conditioned. So you either accept it or you work against it. Working against it is usually not fruitful and leads to what you mentioned above. Those of us who choose not to be vulnerable either do a good job of covering it due to trauma, or you can pay a therapist to listen to your issues so you are not bottling them up. Also, even opening up to other men has become an issue. We have become less social than ever, and it is affecting everything. Story 18. Why are you not vulnerable with your friends and family? The question should be, why do men only show vulnerability to the people they sleep with? Story 19. I have heard from many women that they hate going to the doctor because their illnesses are often dismissed as women's issues. I think this is partly why men do not typically open up. It seems like nobody cares, and feelings such as anger, fear, and general anxiety are expected to be managed on their own. Story 20. Women can be violent too. In typical male-female relationships, women are less likely to be physically violent because they lack the capacity. Instead, they may use other means when they feel the urge to be violent. Because this type of violence does not leave physical scars and women are generally less socialized to restrain their anger, it can be unfortunately prominent. Story 21. I find it very interesting to see that most top answers are about the men versus women dynamic, even if it is never mentioned in the original post. What about men being vulnerable with other men in any type of relationship? Story 22. Because women do not always know what they want in a man. They often say they want a sensitive guy. What they may actually mean is they want a man who is attentive and a supportive friend. Story 23. Society teaches people to avoid vulnerability throughout their lives. That is why individuals either shut off their feelings or excessively share their trauma. Being vulnerable is difficult but a positive achievement in life. Story 24. Women's greatest strength is their facade of weakness. Men's greatest weakness is their facade of strength. Story 25. Why do so many children get abused? Why do people abuse their partners? Why does sexual assault occur? Because people sometimes behave poorly. You may have negative experiences with people acting based on harmful beliefs, and life will continue. Men do not get punished for being vulnerable. Sometimes people react poorly to vulnerability or take advantage of it because of their behavior. Everyone has experienced this at some point, in their home, school, workplace, or among friends, anywhere people interact. If you have only experienced this within romantic relationships, it probably means you are not often in vulnerable positions in your life. Story 26. If you are being punished for being vulnerable, you are with the wrong person. It is as simple as that. The lesson should not be to stop being vulnerable, but to leave your partner. There is a percentage of horrible people in every gender. That is the way life is. Some people will use your weaknesses against you, but many others will not. Story 27. Because that is what society says men should face. When people talk about toxic masculinity, this is one of the main points. If you want it to change society and how emotions and the male gender are perceived. Story 28. Because we live in a world that still treats masculinity like a cage instead of a spectrum. Too many people, men and women, are conditioned to believe that vulnerability in men equals weakness. That if a man cries, doubts, or opens up about trauma, he is suddenly less of a man. It is toxic, it is outdated, and it hurts everyone. Men end up bottling pain until it explodes, and the world wonders why emotional repression breeds violence, addiction, or detachment. Worse, some people do weaponize that vulnerability because they were taught to fear or shame softness in men. It is not right. It is not fair. And it needs to be called out. But here is the thing. Being vulnerable is not weakness. It is courage. It is strength. And if someone loses attraction to you because you showed your humanity, they never loved the real you. They loved a fantasy, an archetype, or a control dynamic. So do not stop being real. Do not stop being open. Just get better at spotting who is actually safe to open up to. Your heart deserves care, not a battlefield. Story 29. Might try asking the usual suspects, women who punish them. Yes, young boys can be brutal with each other, but they mostly know they are just pulling each other's chain, mostly. Kids being what they are, some can also be genuinely cruel to each other. However, girls and women are hardwired to perceive an overabundance of vulnerability as a weakness, as insecurity, as unsafe, thus producing some level of disgust, resentment, and frequently a significant loss of respect. So whatever attraction a woman may or may not have had for a man, if there was any to start with, a dramatic reduction results. Certain moments of vulnerability expression for a man make complete sense. Death of a parent, especially of a child, maybe even a pet, and possibly severe physical, often life-altering pain or injury. This can include divorce, home, reputation, and resources being taken from him, and usually, most profoundly, loss of access to his children. Men, however, have an innate burden of performance, and on some level they feel it every day. So it is almost a DNA-level impulse to stow away that pain as quickly as possible to ideally conquer whatever the source of emotional, mental, or physical pain is. Sadly, that might often manifest in substance abuse or even suicide, as statistics illustrate. Many men, though, are courageous enough to face their private and occasionally very public hell more constructively and ultimately rise above it, no matter how long it might take. So an allegedly kind woman will start privately turning her attentions elsewhere. A cruel woman will also do that while openly belittling the man to his face, usually in an increasingly passive-aggressive manner, or talking negatively about him behind his back or online. All those things do is teach the man to shut up and shut down. Then she will probably complain, asking why he never communicates anymore. A genuinely good woman or a truly understanding friend, who is usually another man, mentor, or older male relative, will understand his ambivalent reticence and give him space to communicate in his own way and time. If the man is still there and holding the relationship down, making sure his girl is okay, he is doing his job. If anyone, especially women, disrespects a man, they were never deserving of his company to begin with, and he would be better off alone than with them. As the old saying goes, with friends like those, who needs enemies? Good luck. Story 30. There is a difference between how people like to think of themselves and how they really are. Many people would like to believe they are sympathetic listeners who would never use someone's vulnerability against them, but the reality is different. Story 31. It's a different world. As a man, it doesn't matter how much social engineering or popular psychology there is. You learn you are expected to keep your guard up and be strong. Story 32, we cannot win, brother. The earlier you learn that, the better. I guess we can hope and pray to find a genuinely good woman, but that is harder than finding a needle in a haystack. You open up and say too much, and they think less of you. They are not confident in your masculinity. Or you say nothing and you are not communicative or you do not care about them. Story 33. The lesson of people surpassing their emotions has not just been taught to men. Some women see that behavior too and will be conditioned to view it as a sign of weakness. Story 34. It's because men's issues are not taken as seriously or promoted as much as women's issues. Therefore, gender roles for men are still stuck in the past compared to those for women. Some people also do not genuinely follow what they say or may say something to appear progressive and receive approval, when in reality they are not. Story 35. Because what people, especially women, tend to mean by vulnerability is emotional vulnerability, which entails being open with each other about their emotions. However, the deepest, darkest corners of a man's mind are often not what they mean. It does not matter how strong a bond is. If everything is expressed, a woman is likely to be uncomfortable to a natural extent, be turned off, or use it as a weapon. Story 36. Because the rich patriarchs, want us to suffer, so we become a pool of manpower that does not question orders and responsibilities when they use us to oppress ourselves and everyone else for their profit. That is why they spend so much money on propaganda and manipulation of our entire society. Story 37. I love it when my husband is vulnerable because I know how hard it is for him to do so. However, I am a woman, so my perspective may be different. Story 38. If you want to look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, females bear the children. Human children are exceptionally needy. They know in their bones that they will have to give amazing amounts of attention to their children. With all that in mind, why would they want a needy man? Story 39. Because they do not know the difference between vulnerability and weakness, and do not understand the difference between the perception of vulnerability and weakness, they speak from a position of weakness when they present themselves as vulnerable, implying that the weakness still exists. I have seen strong men cry like a baby and remain strong all the same, and I have seen men wanting to appear strong, only talking about how they feel, yet appearing inconsequential and weak. Both are possible. Only one results in consistently being seen as less than. Story 40. Because women say what sounds good but almost never mean it. Ask a woman if a famous large woman is a 10. When she says yes, promptly tell her that she reminds you of that woman. Be prepared to duck because unsecured objects may start flying in your direction. Story 41. My wife and I are doing couples therapy. Even the therapist was surprised at how difficult I found it to use any sort of language about how I was feeling. I tend to just explain what the problem is and what impact it is having. The therapist said my wife would understand me better if I could use words describing how I felt. So we would talk about the issues, and the therapist and I, together with my wife there, would rephrase my issues as some sort of declaration of how I feel. Immediately, my wife became very defensive. She insisted my feelings were wrong, that me saying I felt that hurt her feelings, and that now I need to deal with the trauma I caused her by being inconsiderate and saying such hurtful things. After a few sessions of that, the couples therapist decided I should go back to not talking about my feelings. Story 42. I opened up recently to a friend, someone I trusted, but she has such a warped view of the world, completely blinded by her own ideology. She took the things I shared in vulnerability and twisted them to push her own agenda. At one point, she said, "I'm happy men are committing suicide more and more. It just means fewer men in the world for us to deal with." Hearing that broke something in me. Since then, I've lost faith in people. Even with my girlfriend of 6 years, I had to dig up old wounds just to help her accept a basic truth. Yes, women suffer and men suffer too. Both can be true. Why is that so hard to accept? Every time I talk about my struggles as a man, it gets hijacked with, "Yeah, but women have it worse." Suddenly the conversation is not about my pain anymore. It's about proving I'm not the bad guy. When did listening to a man's pain become optional? Why does pain have a gender attached to it? Why is it a competition? I'm not saying women don't have problems, but why is my suffering always redirected to someone else's suffering like it is a prize to be earned and competed for? We keep saying we want equality, but that's not what's happening. What people really want is to feel morally righteous, to be seen as good or defenders of justice, even if it means shutting others down. Feminism was supposed to be about equality, but now it's being used as a weapon to silence, to shame, to label. If you dare to speak up, you're instantly branded a misogynist. No discussion, no understanding, just judgment. Feels like no one actually wants to hear men. Everyone wants to speak, to be validated, to be right, but when a man tries to be honest, he's punished for it. That's the real contradiction. And honestly, it sucks. Story 43. Because most people confuse vulnerability with emotional dumping. In relationships, when a man opens up from a place of neediness or loss of control, it tends to repel rather than attract. True vulnerability is saying, yes, I'm going through something, while still being composed, clear-headed, and grounded. That is strength, and strength with emotional depth is deeply attractive. But when a man opens up hoping to be rescued or emotionally held together by someone else, especially a romantic partner, it flips the polarity. She no longer feels safe leaning into him, and attraction eventually drops. That said, the exception is with close, loyal friends and family. The ones who love us unconditionally are there to help carry the weight sometimes, as long as we are not constantly dumping without reflection. Even then, the good ones will gently steer us first and eventually give us the push we need. So no, men do not get punished for vulnerability. They get punished for collapsing under it. Story 44. Because women are capable of terrifying levels of destructive mental and emotional cruelty completely casually at the whim of their emotions. Women are vicious and will go for the first thing they can think of that will hurt you the most. Being vulnerable to those kinds of women literally makes you vulnerable to their next emotional onslaught. You gave them the ammunition by opening up, and they have been honing their verbal and emotional combat skills against other women their whole lives, so they are a lot better at it than us. The second reason is that women today no longer learn life lessons from older generations of women who would have taught them how to deal with a man's emotions. They were brought up in the modern feminist age where men do not matter at all, and their feelings definitely do not matter because they are all villains and oppressors. Only women matter, and caring about men makes you a misogynist. This has made many women incredibly selfish and self-centered, only caring about their own feelings. Also, in my experience, women are the ones who propagate the societal pressure to be stoic and self-sacrificing. I have only ever had one man in my life pull that on me, and ironically he was gay and the only man I have known who genuinely embodied what I would call toxic masculinity. Thank God not all women are like that, but a very significant portion of them are, in my opinion. Story 45. Everyone is going to have a different experience that can unfortunately be similar to others. My honest answer is that you have not found the right partner. Someone who is mature enough to realize that you are human. My wife has seen me at my best and has been by my side at my worst. She has never used it against me, and I am able to express whatever I am going through. She knows the emotional struggles my father put me through, with stereotypical, be a man, and men do not cry sentiments. She says that it is nice that I can be vulnerable with her. Feels good when I can. I am sorry to all the brothers out there who cannot share that experience or have not felt that comfort yet. Story 46. Stereotypical gender roles and immature behavior exist in some people. While not everyone exhibits these traits, they are common enough. The same situation can occur with assertive women. Story 47. Woman here. This may be a controversial take, but it is my experience. I've had multiple men open up to me, and it was absolutely at the wrong time. It was so early that it made me feel uncomfortable, but it seemed as though they desperately needed to talk about their issues and trauma. I did not begin these conversations since I did not want to discuss these things so soon, but it was like being held hostage once the conversation started. There is a time and place for more emotional and heavy discussions. Since many men do not speak about these things with their male friends, they sought me as a therapy shoulder or a romantic partner. This turned me off immediately and made me pull back. Timing is everything. There is no 100% correct answer that will work with each person, but sometimes it is too personal and too fast. Story 48, because that is what vulnerability is, putting yourself in a position where you could be hurt. Let us not act surprised when we then get hurt. If the risk were not there, then you would not be vulnerable. Story 49, on the individual level, a big part of it is a skill issue, both in being vulnerable and in the people listening. There is vulnerability, and then there is being pathetic to extract care and attention. The former expresses real fears and insecurities, requiring considerable courage and trust to remove the armor and be seen as you truly are. The latter is petulant at best and manipulative at worst. It is the difference between a quiet confession of fear about not being as capable as one seems and childish attention-seeking. One is a genuine vulnerable confession, the other is something else entirely, best avoided. Regarding the skill issues of the audience, many of us hold misguided beliefs about acceptable expressions of masculinity that need to be addressed in the coming years. Taking this in good faith, many people have never learned to hold space for someone being genuine. They have not explored that possibility, sometimes not even for themselves. This is understandable, as it is incredibly uncomfortable and goes against many social norms. It requires comfort with sitting with tension and allowing things to be. Our entire upbringing encourages us to quickly cover up such discomfort. How many of us grew up around adults who modeled such grace? Yes, there are women who oppose gendered norms, yet their expectations of men remain firmly rooted in the very roles they claim to reject. I try not to engage with hypocrites, which is a good life policy. Many women are not truly anti-patriarchy. They prefer benevolent patriarchy. They are not interested in liberating men, but in the masculinity they can gain through their femininity. I recommend not being vulnerable to this group. If you scratch the surface, you find only surface. Story 50. The honest answer is that most women still believe in toxic masculinity, even the self-professed liberal and progressive ones. There is a recent post in Purple Pill Debate where multiple women openly admit that they refuse to date bisexual men because just the thought of their partner having had sex with a man is a huge turnoff. They believe it makes a man less masculine. Despite their virtue signaling, women also grew up internalizing patriarchal norms. The difference is that they are so accustomed to playing the victim and externalizing their problems that few of them have the introspection to imagine their views and behaviors are inconsistent. So really, they just want a stoic, never struggling, macho masculine man like previous generations, just with extra steps to help them avoid cognitive dissonance. Story 51. Since most women are not biologically inclined to engage in direct physical violence to the same degree as men, they express their aggression through social and emotional violence. Additionally, since women tend to feel negative emotions more strongly, they are expected to have a stronger negative emotional response to discomfort and signs of social, emotional, or physical vulnerability in mates. The only way to address this is for women to control these emotions to the degree that men are expected to control anger and their expression of physical aggression. Story 52. Because of harmful societal expectations of masculinity, both genders tend to contribute to it. There are likely more reasons, but I believe this is one of them. Story 53. I believe it is instinctive to think a man must be strong and stoic all the time. People may blame culture or societal norms, but this has been true long before any of us existed and will continue to be true long after. No propaganda in today's age will change what we instinctively believe. Story 54. I am a crier sometimes, although rarely. When I cried in front of my family, they screamed at me, "Stop crying." I thought, if I am not allowed to have emotions, then women are not allowed to have opinions either. Someone needs to tell mom to be quiet. Story 55. Society abandoned the idea of emotions in men after major armed conflicts because dealing with millions of shell-shocked, disillusioned men after a war they were forced into by the global political elites was more difficult than isolating and institutionalizing those who were broken by it. Story 56. All the people here saying this should be asked in a women's subreddit, but I have mostly seen other men telling their sons to toughen up. Story 57. That's just the way it is. You can do whatever you want, but people are going to react how they want. There is not a whole lot you can do about that. Story 58. because we are loved for what we provide, not who we are. Certainly, nobody is looking to provide us with emotional support. That is the wrong direction. Story 59. Being vulnerable does not always get you punished. In many cases, it actually helps you bond with people on a deeper level. Of course, there will always be jerks who will use it against you. So it makes sense to be alert and only show vulnerability to the people dearest to you. It is also great for weeding out fake people in your life, such as false friends or potential love interests who never had genuine affection for you. In the long term, it is better to let these people go. I personally find people who are never vulnerable, regardless of whether they are men or women, kind of sad. They may have very socially active lives and dozens, if not hundreds, of friends. But when the time gets the best of them, they have no one. Story 60. I prefer to be vulnerable and real, yet strong sometimes, rather than fake. If others do not understand, I do not care. Story 61. Because generation after generation of children raised by women were told how to treat women but never how they should be treated, they were never told their feelings mattered. There was a time when life was really hard, and tending to one's emotions was a luxury, especially for men who were stuck in the role of being protectors and projecting power and strength. Those days are long gone, but the culture of man up and boys don't cry is still quite alive in many places around the world. Nowadays, there is a toxic expectation that men must be commodities to check some boxes, provide, and so on, while being neglected and mistreated. The sad story is that many men either remain silent or offer toxic advice on the topic, either adopting misogynistic views or blindly following harmful dating advice in hopes of gaining romantic attention. Times are changing, though. I can see it in younger generations. I try to practice empathy as much as I can. I do not tolerate anyone mocking someone, man or woman, for opening up and showing vulnerability. I am happy to see that at least within my community, that behavior is slowly fading away. Story 62. That is the same for women too. I think we should stay away from those kinds of people. I believe we should be able to talk about our vulnerabilities with our friends. Story 63. What I have learned and wish was taught to every man worldwide at a very young age. Never, under any circumstance, show any form of emotional vulnerability in front of a woman. It will be used against you even if it takes years. Regardless of the relationship, it will be used. Story 64. Men do not get punished for being vulnerable. Men get punished for losing control of themselves. Look at an artist. What does an alternative rock musician do other than get up on a stage and cry their heart out, wallowing in all their pain, anger, and heartbreak? There is nothing more vulnerable than a rock musician crying out his soul over his desire to break down, over the suicide of a friend, or the love of his life leaving him. The best songs are those where you can see the artist visibly shaking, where you can hear just the slightest tremor of imperfection in their performance as they ride the storm in their heart. And then they leave the stage. They smile and they snap themselves out of it, not having lost control even once. People do not mind vulnerability. You just need to be able to keep yourself under control while you are doing it. Story 65. As a 25-year-old female, I think it comes down to societal expectations, honestly. Men are often taught to suppress their emotions, to be tough, and when they do open up, it can feel like they are going against those norms. Sadly, some people, intentionally or not, can misuse that vulnerability or lose attraction because they do not understand it. But in a healthy relationship, vulnerability should be seen as a strength, not a weakness. The right person will respect and appreciate you for being real. Story 66. I think this may just be the people you hang around. I actively encourage any man in my life to be vulnerable because it can get annoying when a man cannot express his feelings or what is upsetting him. Other men have asked me before how I would react to them being vulnerable and have told me their experiences of people being cruel to them after expressing sadness or issues. It is a sad world we live in, but you just need to find people who care about you. Story 67. Because people rely on men to be strong. For example, my mother can get emotional all the time, but if my father showed vulnerability, the whole family would panic. We expect him to be strong, maybe because we rely on him, and when he shows any weakness, we feel threatened. I believe a similar psychology is behind women being attracted to strong men. Story 68. I think society is unaccustomed to men opening up, so they retreat to gender norms. Although society can change, I genuinely believe biases remain rooted in the brain. Story 69. Because humans can exploit vulnerability whenever they get the opportunity, no questions asked. As a man, you must understand that you should never show vulnerability to anyone, no matter the cost. Story 70. That means they are associating with the wrong people. It is easy to blame the mean people around you, but you have the responsibility to decide who you surround yourself with. Story 71. I will be honest and say that I think men can be vulnerable but have to be extremely careful about who they are vulnerable around. I'm not sure if I am lucky, but I have never had anyone weaponize my vulnerabilities. I do think women tend to use words as their weapons when angry, and that sometimes involves weaponizing your vulnerabilities. The more mature the person and the better they are at managing anger, the less likely they will do that. I would certainly not be vulnerable to younger, more immature women. I remember some of the things my younger sister said during her teenage years, and I can't imagine what she would have said in moments of anger if she knew all of my vulnerabilities. I can trust her now and routinely talk about things I struggle with, but we are both adults now, and she doesn't say unhinged things when angry anymore. Story 72. Because some men make the mistake of listening to words over actions, never go by what people say. Story 73. Vulnerability is a cloudy word that obscures more than it illuminates. It is better to break it down into two contrasting concepts: sensitivity and fragility. You can be sensitive without being fragile and fragile without being sensitive. Women want you to be able to recognize, name, and compartmentalize your feelings. This is sensitivity. A man who is not sensitive to his own feelings will not be sensitive to hers either. Women do not want you to be fragile, which means passing the onus of emotional regulation onto her. You are not a toddler, and she is not your mother. Obviously, a good relationship will have partners able to help each other. Everyone needs some help sometimes, but it is usually a question of degree. Some men think they are opening up by trauma dumping on their girlfriend. Story 74. As a man who is nearly 40, I have yet to see this scenario play out in my personal life or even that of my friends. I believe this does not happen as often as you are led to believe. Story 75. Why do so many men find that when they open up emotionally, their vulnerability is used against them, causes others to lose attraction, or even feel disgust? Because experience shows that these are the outcomes of opening up. Simple as that. The unspoken corollary is that if experience has taught men that being vulnerable is a weakness and will be used against them, then those using it against them may not be the bastions of goodness we expect. I don't know if we are ready for that conversation or not, though. Story 76. I do not have a better explanation. It is what it is. It is probably deep in our biology. However, of course, it is a social mistake to say it outright. Story 77. Because we are forged in fire, for better or worse. The old ways will not die easily, and so men are still raised to reject their humanity. The instant a man opens up or has feelings, it is always a problem for everyone involved. Always. It would not be so bad if therapy was involved, but it rarely is because it is not considered manly to need help. It does not matter if you have been married for years. The second you show any kind of humanity, you are instantly seen as less of a man and are not just emasculated but branded by a society full of conservative people, male and female alike, with every soul-wrecking comment that could be made and worse. Eventually, you just stop caring. Story 78. The strongest of men are not afraid to be vulnerable. If a partner or friend does not support you and sees you as less for being a human being, they are not a friend or partner worth having in your life. A true friend is someone you can speak to and share what is eating inside you without fear or judgment. The same goes for a partner. Story 79. Esther Pearl points out that caretaking is an anti-aphrodisiac. We have a thin line to walk between being vulnerable enough to connect but not trauma dump in a way that seems infantile. Moreover, there is an assumption that women are emotionally more intelligent, creating increased pressure on women who are not equipped to be extra emotionally intelligent, while men suffer the opposite problem of being underappreciated as emotionally inept, even when they can be emotionally smart. It is mismanaged expectations. To avoid punishment, the unfortunate answer is to find someone who will not be punishing, but that is likely to be a challenge on average, except for the luckiest men. Story 80. People like to say nice flowery words but do not actually believe or live by them. They say men should be sensitive and vulnerable but get uncomfortable when men open up about their feelings and weaknesses. They say men should be strong and protective but get scared when men become violent in confrontations. This is, of course, a generalization, but men need to strike a balance between being sensitive enough to be attuned to the feelings of their partner and having a strong presence to project physical strength without actually using it. Story 81. Because every revolution in history has started with a group of men in a room discussing their feelings. If you prevent men from talking to each other, you have an obedient working class. The cost is incalculable, especially to men and boys, but that is a sacrifice those in power are willing to make. Story 82. I honestly have no idea what people mean by vulnerable, and I can never get a straight answer from anyone. Could you specify what you mean by opening up emotionally? Story 83. Very true. Many men become bitter and cannot laugh. They blame the world for their problems, which are mostly caused by themselves. Story 84. Because they surround themselves with negative people. Why are you surrounding yourself with people you don't feel safe being vulnerable around? There are many great people out there who will allow you to express yourself without judgment. Find them. Cut the toxic people out of your life. Story 85. Because we are not supposed to be, we must think of our evolution from the perspective of ancient nomadic tribesmen. If you are a woman in an age with a life expectancy of 20 years, do you want a weak, I talk about my feelings, or a stoic, I am strong man to defend you from a wild boar? Story 86. Men are better off not opening up emotionally to women. They say they are okay with it, but they criticize you if they see too much sensitivity. Talking about how you feel in the relationship will only hurt a man in the long run. It is better to remain stoic and keep your mouth shut. This keeps women more on their toes anyway. Story 87. I think it is biology, and if you look at the history of our species, it is full of conflict and aggression. A man who cries would have no future in the Middle Ages, when people had much to cry about. We should understand where the miscommunication between genders lies. Of course, women want men to open up. They want them to be truthful and show their inner feelings. However, from a biological point of view, maybe subconsciously women need to know if anything is wrong with their partner. They have to make an existential decision that will affect them for the rest of their lives, since pregnancy makes them completely reliant on their partner. The desire to know him better might feel like a genuine part of romance, but the biological aspect only triggers if there is something to worry about. Basically, I do not think people want men to open up because they care about what they have to say, but to be sure they are not unhinged, volatile, psychopathic, or melancholic. Complaining about it will not change anything. Story 88. Do they? I know we hear about it happening, but it makes sense that people are more vocal about problems than saying, I did something and it went fine. In my experience, the bigger problem is that boys are not socialized to be vulnerable and get in trouble when they constantly criticize women they know instead of having a more reciprocal relationship. Obviously, part of this also comes with general maturity. At 36, I am more mature, and the people around me tend to be more mature than at 18. Story 89. Patriarchal standards were established by men in power who want other men to be cogs in their machine. They do not care about the feelings of others and create a culture that also disregards those feelings. Then there is counterculture feminism, which believes that the men who created these standards and those who suffer from them are the same. This leads to a pushback against men in general, resulting in a lack of care for men's feelings. Ultimately, people are divided and fighting about men, but no one is fighting for men because no one cares about how men feel. Story 91. Daddy's girl versus mama's boy. Father's impression on daughter. Father doesn't show emotion around daughter. Mother and father show and express emotion behind closed doors. There is no communication between parents and children about expressing emotion. Pretend compassion is instilled. Children suffer in silence. Daughter grows up feeling that showing emotion is weak, like a man. Daughter is no longer a child but does not understand how, as a woman, to equally support her partner. Boyfriend cries on her shoulder, and she immediately becomes unattracted to him. If he cries, he is not as strong as her father. Man gets heartbroken and suppresses his emotions. 10. Man's next girlfriend is treated poorly. He does not communicate and is always guarded. 11. Original daughter wonders why she cannot find a good, strong man. All the good men are taken. She looks at social media and wishes she had a partner like those women have. Story 91. This is definitely a difficult situation for men, and a particularly cruel one at that. Story 92, both actually. What I meant is that masculinity should be personally defined by the individual. If you are a man, then you are masculine. What that means should be up to you. Masculinity exists on a spectrum from the traditional macho man archetype to its complete opposite. We should not feel confined to one end of that spectrum. We should be free to explore the full range of human experience because that is exactly what we are, human. In modern society, vulnerability is often seen as a feminine trait. But that perception is flawed. In reality, it takes incredible strength to open up to others. Cruelty is easy. That is why weak people often resort to it. They lack the emotional depth or empathy to genuinely understand others. So yes, vulnerability may be perceived as leaning toward the feminine, but embracing it is a strength and an essential step toward unlearning the toxic messaging many of us were raised with. We are told that men should not feel, and yet we act surprised when suicide rates among men are so high. The connection is not hard to see. What is ironic is that when I advocate for men on women's forums, I face resistance from both men and women. The truth is, we are far more alike than different. Yet most people, regardless of gender, rarely take the time to truly understand each other. You stand to gain much more by expanding your perspective than by criticizing someone who is pushing for the very change you claim to want. Story 93. Opening up is like playing with fire. Sometimes it warms your heart, and other times it burns down the whole emotional house. Story 94. It's sad. I live when my partner is vulnerable, cries, and allows me to support him. That tells me he trusts me completely, and who doesn't want that? Men deserve better. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.